Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Political State from the Oklahoman. I'm Ben Felder here in the Oklahoman studios. On today's episode, we're going to take a look at elections, which we normally do, but we're going to look way ahead. 2019, some Oklahoma City Council elections. Candidate for Ward 2, James Cooper, is going to be in studio with us today to discuss his candidacy. On this show, it's never too early to look at elections, but we do have some that are a lot more near, including the race for governor, and that's what we're going to spend our time talking about in this first segment. Joining me in studio is the Oklahoman's Justin Wingerter. And Justin, I don't know how many days we are away from the November election, but we have a big runoff in the Republican side for governor coming up here in just a few weeks. Yeah. Even though we have that runoff, I want to talk a little bit about the general election, and maybe we got a little bit of a preview of what that may look like. Mick Cornett, former mayor of Oklahoma City, is taking on Tulsa businessman Kevin Stitt in the Republican runoff. Whoever wins is going to face Drew Edmondson, the Democratic nominee. Yeah. You know, Chris Castile, our colleague here at the Oklahoman, had a story in today's paper actually about maybe some little partisan shots between Stitt and Edmondson, who both appeared at a forum. What happened?
Yeah, we usually don't analyze one incident like this. I mean, especially when Chris is covering he's all over the place. He's following these guys around the state. But there is an interesting little interaction. I think you could probably analyze it if we want to go into it. This is reading from our own Chris Castile's article here. So Kevin Stitt is making sort of a tongue-in-cheek argument here that Democratic policies were better for him because he was a businessman who, and Democratic policies hindered competition. So once he was already established, Obama's policies ultimately helped him. Yeah. And so he makes this argument and, quote, once you're already established, you've already got your company, you're already in the game, then yeah, create more barriers to entry and more regulation, but that is harmful for the middle class. It's harmful for growth and entrepreneurship. This is, in my opinion, baiting Edmondson a little bit here. And Edmondson goes for it initially, at least. He says, quote, "It wasn't Democrats who got us into this mess." He adds, "It has not been Democratic policies being a bar to growth. It has not been Democratic policies over the last 8 years that have driven us into a $1 billion hole 2 years in a row and caused our bond rating to be reduced." And that's all I'm going to say on a partisan basis, because I think we have to work across party lines to get things done. Yeah. And so I think Edmondson goes partisan for a minute because he gets a partisan attack on him, and then he comes back a little bit and takes a step back. And Stitt finishes by saying, "Well, I'm glad my opponent pointed out how Obama's policies were very, very good for the United States of America." And Edmondson says, "Oh, nice." Yeah. I think Stitt is legitimately glad that his opponent said that. I mean, I think he's clearly trying to bait him into defending Obama in the state that does not care for the former president too much. So, I mean, a little partisan back and forth there, a little baiting.
And a few things on that. One is it does look like Stitt kind of baited him, which I think actually shows a little bit of politically savviness that he may not have possessed even several months ago. A newcomer, I think early on, Stitt is out of all the candidates, because there's probably been the most room for growth as a new candidate. And from my perspective, it seems like as I've seen him at forums and seeing him speaking to different groups, I mean, he's getting more of a hang of the politics, as you would expect, you know. Yeah. But I don't want to draw attention to this incident because I feel like it was some kind of blow up, or that they were about to draw blows at each other. No. I think what's interesting is it brings up the topic of how will the Republican nominee run against the Democrat and vice versa. Edmondson is the nominee for the Democrats, so we know who that's going to be. And his appeal to voters is going to be that, listen, a lot of these budgetary challenges we've been dealing with over the last couple of years, a lot of the financial problems of the state, Republicans have been in charge. So why would you want them to stay in charge? Give me the keys to the car. But I think we don't know what the Republican nominee is going to say, because I think it could be different between Cornett and Stitt. I feel like Cornett is going to, this is my guess here, and give me your feedback here, but I feel like Cornett is going to be more inclined to say that, we need, good conservative principles. And, he's really trying to, push forward his conservative chops, really good conservative principles, money management. Look what I did at Oklahoma City. That was a bipartisan place. I feel like Stitt is the one who may be more aggressive in saying, playing the anti-democratic card, which can play well in a state like this. Sure. Like you said, there's not a lot of love lost for the former president, And I think a lot of Democrats thought that after Obama left office, hey, Republicans in Oklahoma aren't going to have Obama as the punching bag anymore. But we still see his name being a vote.
Yeah.
I mean, just kind of what are your thoughts on that? I mean, you think that there is going to be a difference between Cornette and Stitt in terms of how they, how much they try to play this as a Republican versus Democrat race?
I do. And I think how Edmondson attacks is very different because this attack, Edmondson's response here, it has not been Democratic policies these last 8 years, is a great attack line if you're going against Todd Lamb, who he is not facing, obviously. Yeah. It's a slightly better attack, or it's a fair attack against Cornette, who, while not in state government, has been in government, has been in power. It's a much weaker attack against Kevin Stitt, who's running on outsider, and who would largely agree that, yes, things have not been as good as they should have been the last 8 years, even under Republican control, because they haven't been conservative enough or whatever it may be. And so he's running on that outsider ticket. He is probably going to nod along right to something like that. And so that attack from Edmondson, the response from Edmondson at least, is not as effective against Stitt as it would be against certainly Lamb, who's of course not running anymore, or even Cornette. So that's interesting. Your question of how do the Republicans go after Edmondson? Does it change whether it's Cornette or Stitt? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I feel like Stitt, and maybe it's because on the conservative meter, he's more to the right than Cornette. I don't think there's any dispute about that. I mean, Cornette may dispute that today before the runoff. I think after the runoff, if he were to win, I don't think he'll try to dispute that as much. But I mean, because there has been a movement to the right, as there naturally is in a Republican runoff. But I think Stitt will probably feel a lot more comfortable kind of going after the anti-democratic sentiment, and kind of, which right now is really a national thing too. I mean, even though the national politics have little to do with state politics, but here Stitt is kind of evoking Obama's name and Obama's policies.
Yeah.
I mean, Fallon did that quite a bit in both her election and her re-election, railing against the federal government, which was a little bit more relevant because you did have a Democrat president. She could run and say, look at Obamacare, look at some of these other policies that have an impact in the state. We need to fight back in Washington. But I feel like Stitt is probably going to be more inclined to be the candidate that runs against Democrats aggressively than Cornette might be. And maybe also because Cornette, who has really kind of been this, came into the race as kind of this moderate, force at a time when a lot of people are frustrated with party politics. Now, he's not running as an independent, obviously, but you see a lot of moderates that say that they support Cornette. And, it's not uncommon to find Democrats, especially here in Oklahoma City, who say, I like Cornette. Now, he's not running for their votes right now. He's trying to get those Republican votes. But so I do expect there to be a little bit of a correction for Cornette, or an adjustment for Cornette if he were to win the runoff, more so than I think we'd see for Stitt.
I would agree. Yeah, I think that's accurate.
But you make a great point. I think Edmondson probably feels like his attack of saying, hey, 8 years of failed Republican leadership works a lot better when you're running against Lamb, the lieutenant governor. Stitt can say, I agree with you. It's been horrible 8 years of leadership. That's why we need true conservatives in the seat.
Right.
Well, a lot of people make the mistake, I think, of saying that there's a lot of frustration towards leadership at the state. Leadership is Republicans, so the state is going to move to the left. For some, that may be the case. But I think for a lot of people, especially Republicans, they say, you know what, our problem is they aren't Republican enough. They're not conservative enough, and that's why we're in the situation we're in.
Well, and we had polling last week, I think, or the week before, that Fallon is now the least popular governor in the country. You don't get that way in this sort of partisan environment unless you're angering both sides. And that's what she's done. I mean, she's had some fairly moderate policies that have angered conservatives, and obviously she's not gone over well with Democrats. So that's the only way you get like that super unpopular rating, or on those sort of lists, or at the top of a list you don't want to be on, is when you're frustrating both sides. And she certainly has. I mean, look at the way, going back to the governor's race, look at the way some of the Republicans ran against Fallon's legacy even, and against Fallon, frankly. I mean, to say that they were going to be something different, even as Republicans, even in the case of the lieutenant governor, and I mean, running against the governor's legacy in a lot of ways. So there is some frustration on both sides. Fallon has not quite found the balance there, and instead has often just frustrated both sides, which it happens sometimes.
Yeah, especially when you're at the end of an 8-year term or 8 years in office. Edmondson, you mentioned that he, right after, being partisan, said we need to be bipartisan. I feel like he's going to be more dependent on that message, right? I mean, if you're running as a Democrat in Oklahoma, you're going to have to talk a lot about working across the aisle.
Yes.
One, because it's practical. Because if you were to win the governor's office, Republicans are likely going to have control of the House and the Senate. So there's going to have to be some bipartisanship there.
Right.
But two, you're still trying to appeal to some Republican voters, maybe some moderate Republican voters, in addition to trying to turn out your base. So for Edmondson, working across the aisle, we're probably going to hear working across the aisle more from Edmondson than we would from Stitt and probably Cornette, wouldn't you think?
Yeah. I think Edmondson just got baited a little bit in this exchange, and he fell into a partisan. He didn't say anything outrageous, of course. I mean, it was just a defense of a Democratic president. There's nothing wrong with that, of course.
Yeah.
But I think he got baited a little bit, and then he came back. And I'm not going to be partisan about it. We need to be bipartisan, and because he absolutely has to pick up some Republican voters. I mean, unless turnout numbers are something bizarre, he's going to have to bring in some moderate Republicans to his side, and or else he can't win a general election in November.
Yeah. Well, before we know who he's going to run against, we have to have this runoff in a few weeks. Polls have shown that it's pretty tight. Some polls have shown a virtual tie between Cornette and Stitt. What's going to make the difference, you feel like, on this home stretch?
Man, I mean, the polling showed a very tight race in the previous primary, and it was a very close race. And there's no reason not to believe it won't be again. I mean, what's fascinating to me, and we talked about it right after the first, the primary, before we got to a runoff. Right after that, we talked about that map, and you can see, obviously, Stitt dominates in Tulsa, Cornette dominates in Oklahoma City, and the rest was Lamb country. And right now, you're seeing both of those try to appeal in Lamb country, and they have to get out of their comfort zone a little bit. They're city guys. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But they do have to get out and put on the blue jeans and the boots and stuff and appeal to those Lamb voters. So who can do that better? That takes organization. It takes a message too, though. Stitt was probably more conservative. Well, he is more conservative in my opinion. So that probably appeals to the rural voters. But Cornette has good organization, and he has an ability to win over a lot of people that politically may not care for him. But he does have a certain appeal, a certain charm to him. So whoever gets those rural voters wins this runoff, because I don't think the Tulsa, Oklahoma City numbers change a whole lot. I mean, obviously with fewer candidates they change somewhat, but I think it's all the other voters on the outside.
Yeah, I think you're right about they're getting out of their comfort zones right now. Chris Castile, who is on the road with Cornette last week, I think it was, in some of the western rural counties, was my favorite part about his reporting were the photos that he was sharing on Twitter. And one was he was in a hardware store where the father owner with his son, who's likely going to be taking over the family business someday, were both just kind of staring at Cornette with their arms crossed as he was in there, essentially giving his stump. Now, it probably was a pretty pleasant conversation. I mean, I don't think that they had a kind of a stern look, a serious look on their face. That was just probably the moment the picture was taken. But, he probably is a little bit out of his comfort zone and sticks out of place in a hardware store in western Oklahoma. Stitt would too. I would. I mean, I imagine I think I would probably too. stick out as well. Well, what do you think? What do you think rural Oklahoma is wanting to hear from gubernatorial candidates?
I mean, every voter first and foremost wants to feel like they're heard and that the candidate's going to care for them if they were to go on to be the governor. And you're not going to ignore us. I mean, there's certainly a belief in rural areas that they are ignored. They don't get the same sort of voice that the cities do. That's a long-running complaint, and they're often right about that. So there's that. I mean, there are certain areas, oil and gas areas, will have their own issues, and agricultural areas with a number of issues right now that they're facing. So every area is going to be a little different. I mean, first and foremost, though, you have to make people feel like you're on their side, you understand them, despite coming from a city, a major city. You can understand them, you can understand their way of life, and you can sympathize with that, and you will keep them in mind when you're in the governor's office.
Yeah, so. I mean, don't underestimate that anti-city sentiment that some feel in some parts of the state. I mean, I know I'm working on a story right now, taking a look at some races, including one kind of in the Tallahassee area, and talking with some residents there. They've got a VA center they're about ready to lose, and they feel like it's destined to Tulsa. And they've got a nearby lake that they've been fighting with Oklahoma City for taking its water. I mean, so one person told me, Tulsa's trying to take our largest employer, Oklahoma City's trying to take our water. I mean, that's kind of, it's a real sentiment. Even if they do enjoy an occasional trip or two to the city, now if you're a Republican rural voter that doesn't really care for either city, you've got a former Oklahoma City mayor and you've got a Tulsa businessman. You're probably thinking, who am I going to do? Although Cornett probably has more of the city stamp, right? I mean, you led a city, your identity is intertwined with an urban area. But Cornett is not shying away from that. An ad that he came out with this week, shows quick cuts of the Oklahoma City skyline, almost like a Chamber of Commerce video promoting Oklahoma City as a destination, and him talking about what he did to help turn Oklahoma City around, or at least continue to push Oklahoma City forward, and saying, I want to do the same thing for the state. So he's not completely abandoning, trying to run away from that.
Oh yeah. He can't. I mean, he just can't get away from that. That is his claim to fame.
And there's no point in trying to, right?
No,
I mean, really, you've got to, I don't even use the word double down because it sounds like he has, that it's a bad thing. I mean, this is what he's running on, right? This is the platform that I've effectively led a major American city, and I want to do the same at the state level.
And there are some great areas in Tallahassee, and I love it down there, by the way.
It's gorgeous,
It's terrific. But if you drive down the main street, there are still signs about the water issue with Oklahoma City. It's a very passionate issue.
Yeah, I mean, Tallahassee is such an interesting place across, this just composite of issues. You've got the VA center and the issues going there. Like I said, you've got water rights issues just down the road. Half of downtown right now is a pile of bricks because of a meth lab gone wrong. I mean, so you've got the drug epidemic, at play there. It's a small town that provides you with a lot of examples of some of the challenges facing rural Oklahoma.
I'll gladly do this show from Tallahassee.
Well, we'll take it on the road. We'll take it on the road someday. We do need to get the show on the road. Maybe Tallahassee would be a good destination. It is really gorgeous on that side of the state. A lot different than Western Oklahoma. Western Oklahoma has its beautiful parts as well, but for different reasons.
I'm not picking winners and losers in case I want to run for governor someday.
True.
You don't want to start bad-mouthing anybody.
Yeah, these are the I'm sure. You're exactly right. You can't take any chances. Well, that's going to do for this first segment. We're going to continue to obviously follow the gubernatorial race, especially the runoff, coming up on August 26th. I believe that's right, that Tuesday, 26th. 28. August 28th, the Republican runoff. We've got a few more shows up until then, so we'll obviously be taking a closer look at the race between Cornett and Stitt. We're going to take a quick break. When we get back, we're going to continue to talk elections, but we're going to look way into the head in 2019. Some city council seats here in Oklahoma City are up for election. Councilman Ed Shadid is not seeking re-election, he has said, and James Cooper is one of those candidates that's going to be running for his seat. He's going to be joining us here in the studios when we return for Political State from the Oklahoman. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back to Political State from the Oklahoman. I'm Ben Felder. Joining me here in the second part of our episode is a Jefferson Middle School teacher, a trustee of the city's transit authority, and also a candidate in Ward 2 here in Oklahoma City, Mr. James Cooper. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks so much for having me, Ben. This is great.
Yeah, well, we spend so much time, we talk politics on the show, hence the name. We talk a lot about elections, and this race is still a little bit of ways out, although you're already in campaign mode. So not too much focus right now on the city council races, but I do think this is just a really interesting time in the life of the city. Leadership at the city doesn't seem to really change a whole lot, especially at the mayor's race. We just saw the longest tenure mayor leave. We have a new mayor in David Holt. I'm curious, give me your perspective on what is this moment of the city? It feels like we're kind of, embarking on a new chapter, as we probably always are. But what do you feel like that new chapter of the city is looking like, and what should we be paying attention to?
Yeah. Well, first, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Really, I'm excited to be here. I think to answer your question, past is prologue here, is what I would say, as we write this next chapter. A couple things. One, I would consider Mayor Holt a friend, and over the last 3 years of serving on the Transportation Board, I've worked really hard to develop relationships with my fellow trustees, the city manager. Last summer when I was off of school, I actually set aside time to meet with everyone from finance to the Economic Alliance, planning, because during the school year it's hard for me to get out there and meet someone who's working 9 to 5 when I also am working 9 to 5 in the middle school classroom. And so I've really made it my business over the last 3 years to get to know all the people who make up city staff, start knowing people again, not just on my board, but other boards, and try and develop a good professional working relationship with Mayor Holt.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a bigger spotlight on City Hall right now, especially politics. I think, especially as, as the city continues to grow and maybe part of it is you see, more young families moving in and more civically minded individuals. Oklahoma City, the state's most diverse city, that's definitely reflected in Ward 2. But I don't know. I don't think that diversity is always. We're not the only American city to struggle with this, but it's not always reflected in our leadership, both in representation and sometimes the decisions we make. How do we change that?
Well, I actually want to go back to my comment about this, past being prologue here. I live in the Paseo, and as you know, that's our first commercial district outside of downtown. And I think if we're going to move forward, and I'm really excited to be here right now to be able to help move us forward, I think this is going to be the most exciting chapter yet. I think we got to build on the successes that we've seen and those young families who've already moved back into the inner city. Not just young families, but you have a lot of baby boomers who are retiring, who are moving from the suburbs into our historic neighborhoods. And Paseo is really, I think, the answer for how we move forward. When G.A. Nichols designed Paseo, the goal was we'd walk out of our front door, we would go to sidewalks, right, that would connect us to the neighborhood's basic needs, to the basic needs of the individual, right, whether that's the cleaners, the grocery store, the church, the school. And I think as we continue to grow, we're going to have to borrow from that playbook. I think that's really what this is. And, you talk about diversity and we talk about those young families. I think that when I've been knocking doors for the last 3 weeks, when I knocked doors 3 years ago when I ran for this seat, people, they're excited about what's happening downtown. They're super thrilled about the progress we see in Midtown and in Bricktown, seeing life breathe back into these parts of our city. But a lot of people feel like they want to see that expand throughout their neighborhoods, right? Not just Paseo, but I'm talking all the way out to Camelot Belle Isle, out at 122nd and May behind North Park Mall. That's part of Ward 2. I hear people all the way out by Old Downtown Britain. Same story, different verse, right? They're like, well, we want to see, maybe the buses run more frequently, and we want to see them run out here. We want to see maybe the streetcar expanded out here. We want to see bus rapid transit. We want to see bike lanes. We want to see new streets. We want to see sidewalks that are ADA compliant. A lot of the neighborhoods that have brought their neighborhoods back to life, the neighbors who brought them back to life, they're pretty savvy. They know what works. They know what will attract families to their neighborhood. They know what will retain the ones who are already there. And they talk to me about all these different things. And so I think what we're seeing are a lot of underrepresented neighborhoods, a lot of marginalized people who don't feel necessarily connected to the Renaissance story that we've seen in other parts of the city. But I think this is an opportunity. I know this is an opportunity to connect them to that Renaissance story. That's why I'm running.
Yeah, I mean, on this show, when we're talking a lot about, like earlier in the episode, we were talking about the governor's race, and you're talking about, these big, broad, policy issues, the budget and funding and healthcare and those kind of things. It seems like, what's But the politics that sometimes impacts our life the most, which sometimes gets the least amount of attention, is this kind of local representation, especially at the city level. However, we have been a city over the last few decades of kind of big projects, right? I mean, we look at the MAPS projects and what they've done with, arenas and convention centers now, and a streetcar system. And I'm not saying that the era of big projects is necessarily over, but it does feel like maybe there is this shift to say, hey, what about in between those big projects, at the street level, which you kind of were talking about. I mean, do you feel like that shift is starting to take place at City Hall, or what?
Absolutely, and I think that's what's so exciting about city politics, and why, again, I decided to jump into the race. It's nonpartisan. And so, Mayor Mick Cornett appointed me to the Transportation Board. He's a Republican, I'm a Democrat. Not once on my Transportation Board have we had debates about which political party and any of these big state issues or federal issues. Instead, it really comes back down to, sidewalks, streets, buses, the schools. And so, I think we're really ready going forward, not just with the next maps, but whatever conversations we have. I really think we're ready to learn from what we did right with the Paseo almost 100 years ago, right? Again, someone should be able to walk out of their front door, get onto a sidewalk that gets them to the grocery store, gets them to the school. There should be bike lanes, there should be crosswalks, and there should be street lights, so that as they're walking around, they're doing so safely. And if that neighborhood doesn't meet their basic needs, right, then they should be able to hop on reliable public transportation that does. And again, past this prologue here, you look at Paseo, you look down Robinson, you look down Classen, and you see our history staring us back in the face, right? Anton Classen, John Chartel built a streetcar, as you know. You and I were just talking before the show began. They built a streetcar knowing that a lot of their workers work downtown. They knew that, okay, well, our workers work downtown, we can build homes along the streetcar line that connects people to work, right? So again, if I walk out of my house and I go into the grocery store in my neighborhood, but then the pharmacy is actually downtown, I can hop on that streetcar or the bus and get, the service that I need. And I think that's, not even think, I know that's where the people in Ward 2 are. That's what they want. They want attention on the neighborhoods. And I think because of the nonpartisan nature of City Hall and the different trusts and boards and committees that make recommendations to our city council, I think we're ready for that. I just know we're ready for that.
Yeah. So you referenced your first run at city office. That was in what year?
2015.
2015. I always think it's interesting when, there's running for office at any level is hard work. And some people run and if they're not successful that first time, which few are the very first time, they've got a decision. Am I going to try this again, or am I going to try something else? You're obviously trying it again. I'm curious, when you reflect on that experience, what are your major takeaways? Was there anything that you learned, or that you're doing different, or you're doubling down on?
Absolutely. A couple things. One, I announced pretty late in the game last time. I knocked doors for a month and a half. I knocked 700 doors and got 680 votes. That taught me that if I had knocked doors earlier, right, I might have had a better chance. But at the same time, it's difficult to unseat an incumbent and someone with that much name recognition. So that's one thing. The second thing I would say here is knocking those 700 doors last time, it taught me how to listen really well and to listen to the concerns and the hopes of the people out there. And everything I just rattled off to you, whether it's the sidewalks that are ADA compliant, so that people with strollers can move around safely in their neighborhood, people with disabilities can move around safely in their neighborhood, our baby boomer population, as we start seeing more wheelchairs and motorized scooters and the like. These are things I heard at the doors. These are things I heard at the doors 3 years ago. And so for me, getting back in the race this time, it was like, well, I'm just going to take those voices I heard, those hopes, those concerns, and I'm just going to, hit the ground running with them again. And that's really where it's been. Also, I want to go back to what you mentioned about the big projects. I'm not so sure that the era of big projects is over. I think it's got to be a balance between the needs of the neighborhoods, and again, a lot of those neighborhoods do feel left behind, and the needs of economic growth. I just happen to believe that if we strike that balance just right, we're going to see even more economic growth. We're going to see more people wanting to move from other parts of Oklahoma into our city, and from other parts, quite frankly, of the country and the world. So, you know, again, it's not an antagonism that a lot of people feel toward downtown, midtown, and Bricktown. They just want to be connected to it. Yeah. They want to see what's happening down here happen in their neighborhoods too. And it just so happens, as someone who serves on our public transportation board, that connectivity is always there in my head. So I see the idea that, okay, well, again, if your neighborhood doesn't meet your basic needs, then let's get you on a bus that's running every 10 to 12 minutes, right? Let's see about expanding that streetcar out there to get you to downtown more easily.
Yeah.
So, you know, so many people have brought back to life our historic districts, whether it's the Paseo, the Asian district, the LGBT strip. We're starting to see people look at old downtown Britain right now, the Windsor district. The people did that, right? This wasn't top-down government. This was everyday people working from the bottom up, working with those different departments that I had the pleasure of sitting with last year. They just want to see connectivity. They want to connect to all of these exciting things that are happening downtown, whether it's the Thunder or, you know, seeing all the activity you see in Midtown every weekend.
Yeah. You know, real quick before we wrap up here, you know, just to bring back the kind of comparison of, you know, running for city council compared to maybe, you know, some state office seats, which, you know, sometimes get more attention, but may not be any more important, and you know, maybe less important in a lot of ways. You know, I talk to some candidates that are running for state house or state senate, and I say, I always ask, well, what are the voters talking to you about? And they're, you know, they'll say, oh, they're asking about education, they're asking about healthcare, and they are, but a lot of times when you talk to these candidates, they'll say, you know, off the record, they'll be like, you know, a lot of times they ask me about things that I have nothing to do with. They'll complain about the pothole down the street. They'll talk about public transportation. They'll talk about, you know, why is construction happening at the same time, or are seeming to feel that way. They're asking about, like, these voters are asking about real issues that a lot of times these candidates for state house and senate have to say, well, sir or ma'am, you know, I share your frustration, but, you know, if I were elected to the state house, not much I can do about that pothole. There's not much I can do about improving your park. You probably, I imagine, if you probably have gotten some of those very specific complaints too, you would be in a position to actually maybe do something about it there. You can't just say, I'm sorry, ma'am, there's nothing I can do about it, right?
That's right. That, again, I'm not being hyperbolic when I say I'm excited, because I'm excited to get to work on those issues. These are the things that affect us on the day-to-day basis, right? Being able to get to work safely and on time, being able to get to the grocery store, get to church, get to school. So there's a couple things that I would want to unpack there. One is education, right? We have a historical moment ahead of us, I believe, for the city. We have a young mayor who's talking about, for the first time, really having city involvement in our schools. Let's take him up on it. You know, today on my Facebook page, I went ahead and rolled out one of the things I want to do with education, should I have the honor of serving on our city council. And that is promoting the fact, I'm sure you already know this, a lot of my friends did not, but if a student graduates from Oklahoma City Public Schools with a 2.0 GPA, they get to go tuition free to Oklahoma City Community College. That's a big deal. Also, there's about two handfuls of schools that if they graduate from those high schools in the district, they can go to one of our award-winning Metro Techs for free. Priority one, day one, week one for me is getting that in everyone's water bill, getting that on door hangers. You know, there's this perception that OKCPS hasn't been doing it right, and I'm sure there are critiques that are valid. But one thing that we have done right is we've invested in a college preparation program called AVID. Well, let's connect our city government to that, because that's preparing our students for the next generation of jobs that are coming, these 21st century jobs that everyone talks about with healthcare and technology. If we can, in every 7th and 8th grade class all across Oklahoma City Public Schools, let those students know that they can attend OCCC for free so long as they have a 2.0 GPA, go on to become a paralegal by the time they're 20, or cybersecurity work, or engineering work, making 60, 90,000, which would be about twice to 3 times what I make as a teacher. That's a game changer for our city. That tells families that we at the city level care about education. And we can take that message to businesses all across the country and all across the globe, quite frankly, and say, Oklahoma City is truly a big league city because we care about education. And what can we do to further invest in those ways? Another thing too, you know, that's not creating a new program. That's just marketing the one we got. And the sort of changes that we've been able to make on the COPPA board in people's lives, like for instance, over the last 3 years, I fought to get a Sunday bus service. This city has not provided Sunday bus service since 1964-65. I fought for it with a smile, in working relationships with the people I mentioned earlier. And now for the first time in our city's history, thanks to our city manager, thanks to Councilwoman Salyer, Councilman Shadid, my board director, and all the people who voted for it, we now have Sunday bus service coming this January. That's going to be huge because now we're going to have 7-day-a-week service. And so now's the time. It's the historic time to jump in and say, well, now that we have 7-day-a-week service connecting our workers to work, to our new park that's coming downtown, let's double down. Let's have more buses. With more buses come 10 to 12-minute stops between each bus. This is how we reconnect our city, and this is how we make the schools truly the backbone of the neighborhood, the way they were intended to be in the first place. Again, past this prologue here, past this prologue, and I can't wait to be a part of our future. I think this is going to be an exciting time to be a part of Oklahoma City. Yeah, well, that's great stuff. And once again, just to, I love talking to people who are running for city council and school board, because a lot of these issues are, not to say it's not important at the state level, and we do focus a lot on that, but as you're outlining here, I mean, you're talking about real important issues, and probably half the bills filed at the legislature last year may not have as big of an impact as running buses on Sunday will. I mean, in terms of that direct, immediate impact to real people and being able to fill a gap or fill a need for them. That's right. And if we can do this work at the city level, we can take some of the work off of the state and federal level, and that's another thing I think we can do here as well. If we can get some better streets and sidewalks and better schools at the city level, then maybe we can avoid some of the nasty fights that we see up there at our state capitol. Yeah, good point. Well, James, thanks so much for joining us on this week's episode of Political State, especially after a long day of teaching. Day 2 for you here in Oklahoma City schools. So good luck with the campaign. Good luck in the classroom this year. Well, that's going to do it for this week's episode of Political State. You can find each and every episode at newsak.com. We will see you again next Friday. Thanks for joining us.